Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's From the Field Farm Chat with Idaho Wheat. My name is Ryan Mortensen. I am the Communications and Programs Manager for the Idaho Wheat Commission. Today we are privileged to have Paul Arrington with us. Paul is the Executive Director of the Idaho Water Users Association in Boise, and we are going to chat with Paul today about some current events going on in the water world, particularly with SNOTEL, some staff changing, and then an outlook on Idaho water usage for our farmers this year. Just a reminder as we get going, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute your mic, or type it in the chat, and I will make sure we get that question asked and, if possible, answered by Paul. So Paul, if you would go ahead and just give us a little introduction of yourself, what you do for Idaho Water Users Association, and then we'll kind of get started into our discussion today.
Thank you very much, and thanks again for the invite. I was on here once before, and just appreciate this group of folks. In the water user community, we interact often with the grain producers and others as we're trying to just protect Idaho's water on a whole lot of fronts. And so I even see some names here who are very active in our organization. So I really appreciate you. The Idaho Water Users Association represents groundwater districts, irrigation districts, canal companies, and these similar organizations throughout Idaho. Historically, our groups largely delivered water and managed water for irrigation purposes. We're finding more and more, though, that instead of growing crops like corn and wheat and potatoes, we're growing lawns and parks and landscaping in communities that are growing into our system. Our folks represent in the water user community, represents probably 90+% of the water use in Idaho when you look at ag and ag-related purposes. And so really anything that deals with water, we look at, we are interested in, and we engage on. And today, you just as a side note, you caught me on a good day. The legislative session is drawing to a close, and one of our priorities that we've been advocating for all year has been a consistent, ongoing, reliable stream of funding for water projects in Idaho, and a bill providing $30 million in ongoing funding passed the House floor. Now it's got to go to the Senate, but it's a heavy lift, and so we're pretty excited in our camp today as we look to the future to try and continue to make sure water resources and issues and challenges are addressed long into the future.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that introduction. And let's just kind of jump right in. We were talking earlier about some things that are happening so fluidly with the current administration, with SNOTEL, with USDA, and probationary terminations or layoffs. Can you kind of give us an update as to where that all stands today?
I will, but and I apologize for whatever is in my throat. I'm trying to get it cleared through, but I will, but I'm going to step back just really briefly, because as we look at water management in Idaho, it really is a partnership with a lot of folks, with a lot of entities, with a lot of governments. It's a partnership with the federal government. It's a partnership with the state government. It's a partnership with our neighbors. It is a partnership, and we look to each other and rely on each other for really every aspect of water management in Idaho. And so as we've turned to this new year and a new administration, and I mean, you are all reading the news like I'm reading the news, and it just feels like there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of questions, and every day there's something new as it relates to from a federal government standpoint, as it relates to how the agencies are funded, employees, layoffs, voluntary early retirements, probationary employees. There's just so many things going around, and there's lawsuits in every corner of the country, that it is really easy and really quick to lose sight of what's going on, what is up, what is down, what is right, what is left. We're going to talk a little bit about SNOTEL, those kinds of things, but I want to, our partnership with the federal government in terms of water management in Idaho goes far beyond just those two opportunities. Think the Bureau of Reclamation that runs really our reservoir systems down here in southern Idaho, and they still own some of the canal systems here. Our surface water managers in particular are in daily communication with the Bureau of Reclamation and reclamation employees as it relates to the operations of our systems. The Corps of Engineers owns some of our reservoirs down here in southern Idaho as well, and are also involved in permitting for certain activities as it relates to water, and are very engaged. Think of the Weather Service, think of the USGS, the stream gauging system that we have relied on in a partnership with the state of Idaho since the late 1800s to understand what our rivers are doing. NRCS's snow survey. All water users have, if it's not their homepage, it's the first link tabbed at the top of their page, the SNOTEL survey reports every single day, looking to understand what the snowpack is looking like. Think about the Forest Service and the way it manages our first reservoirs, or those watersheds where snow falls and fills the rivers that then fill our reservoirs. And then you can think of Fish and Wildlife Service, or NOAA, who through the Endangered Species Act also has a lot of interaction on water related stuff. So when we start to hear conversations about, again, early retirements and reductions in force and those kinds of things, it really raises the hairs on the back of your neck. It makes you start getting nervous because you wonder, is there going to be somebody there to open the head gate when the water turns on, and to open the dam, or whatever the case, to manage the power facilities, or to check the stream gauging, or to make sure that the SNOTEL sites are maintained as we go throughout the summer. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, I'd say, in the system. And so the question is, where are we at today? And I'll tell you, I speak often with some of the folks at our federal agency counterparts or friends here in the Valley, just trying to understand. And I will tell you that on the inside, there is just as much a feeling of uncertainty as there is to those of us looking in. Early on, there were voluntary, terminations of employment. You saw that in early February. Then you saw these probationary employees. Probationary employees were new hires or folks who had just been promoted to a different position under the federal government system. Whether you're newly hired or just promoted to a new job, you're in a probationary period for a window of time. You probably saw there was a mass termination of employees with that status. Lawsuits followed. The court said some of them could be reinstated. The administration is appealing that, and so there's still just a whole lot of uncertainty in that sense. Some agencies, including Bureau of Reclamation, even just yesterday was a deadline for voluntary early retirement, allowing employees who were within, I believe it was 5 years of being eligible for retirement, they could take early retirement and get their full retirement benefits. And then there was an order from the administration here in mid-February for each agency to do a plan to identify reductions in force. And they're still looking for some guidance on that, and so guidance on that and how that will play out and how that will affect just the day-to-day operation. So I wish I could tell you that today we know X, but the problem is, frustratingly, today we still don't know. We still just don't know what's going on. And again, I talk often with our friends, particularly a good friend in leadership in the Bureau of Reclamation, and I call her often just to do a mental health check. Like, how are you doing? Because this is stressful. The uncertainty of it all is hard on people. So I guess I'll stop there and see if you have a follow-up question, but that's kind of where we're at. I mean, where we're at, I'll let you, yeah, I'll stop there.
Well, Paul, are we seeing now some of those terminations or layoffs now being rescinded, and people are coming back to their job positions?
Right. So the probationary employee termination was rescinded by a court order. But then again, the administration appealed that. Some of those employees are back. Some of them are not. Not all of them are back. There was some instances where probationary employees were terminated, and then it was realized, oh wait, these are critical duties, and so they were brought back almost immediately. I do know that some have been brought back, but not all. I also know that, when this was all happening, several folks just moved on. They went and found another job somewhere else. And so instead of being brought back, they're now on a different career path. I know the Department of Water Resources was able to, here, a state in the state was able to hire a few folks that had been let go through one of these various mechanisms.
You may not know the answer to this. Do we know how many people were asked to leave?
I don't know the exact number, but I can tell you that, yesterday was the voluntary early retirement deadline. Well, actually, let me go back. I was told that in the first round of reductions in force, including the voluntary separation in reclamation in the region, it was about 10%. That there were probably about 50 additional folks who were eligible or potentially eligible for this early retirement option. And then if you look at the executive order and the conversation around the executive order in mid-February calling for plans for reductions in force, that the starting point for those plans were those employees who were not called into work whenever there's a government shutdown, right? That you start with your critical forces, those folks who stay at work even when the government is shut down and not funded, and you go from there in terms. And the numbers I have heard, and I've heard it from many different sources, is as high as 40% that are potentially subject to this. But again, when I talk to the folks in the agencies, they're just not, they're not sure. They don't even know. They're hearing the same things, and often they're hearing the same things we're hearing from the same sources that we're hearing them from. I did see that like USGS laid off 3 scientists. I don't know how many of those may or may not have come back. NRCS for their snow survey laid off 11 of their technicians. They were going to be faced with 2 people basically to have to do summer maintenance on these SNOTEL sites. There's 90 of them or something like that. I think around 90 of them throughout the state. And so uh, that was kind of phase 1. Again, some folks have come back and others have not. And so what is the impact that we're feeling? I guess that's the big question. What's the impact we're feeling right now? I don't know that we're feeling it in a way that we can point to and specifically identify. But if you look at, for example, the challenges that we've had on surface water and groundwater management in the ESPA over the last couple of years, the data that underlies that management, the data that underlies how we do our year in and year out processes, the data that underlies how we understand the health of our aquifer how our aquifer is responding to all of these good things that people are doing. A lot of that comes from our partnership with USGS and its stream gauging surveys and its stream gauging processes. And so it's not hard to see a really concerning impact from this moving forward. And so then the question will become, okay, then who's going to do this? Now, our stream gauging is some of it is in a partnership with the state. The state has some funding and helps with that process. Will they have to take it all over? What's going to happen? So a lot of questions. We stay engaged with our congressional offices to make sure they're up to date on what kind of concerns and feedback that we're hearing here on the ground.
Right. Has there been an impact, or has this affected the data collection process? I mean, is the data being provided current, up to date, correct?
Right now, yes. Right now, yes. But how all this plays out, again, a lot of what we're feeling right now is fear or apprehension or anxiety over the unknown. We understand because we live this. We understand how vital this is to our day-to-day world. And the the prospect of losing it or potentially having it impacted or shrunk, there's the word I was looking for, is very nerve-wracking. And I would say, let me make a few points just to make sure, although I see Adam has his hand up, I can pause for a moment.
Hey, Paul, there's probably not an answer to this question at this point, but I guess I'm looking at the situation we're in and I'm wondering how it will impact, I guess, as applied methodology orders. So we've had a couple of big changes, we've had some big changes in the methodology order and in the way curtailments are, I guess, the way injuries are predicted and curtailments are calculated in the state.
Yep.
And one of those changes was to change the baseline year, right? Which made the injury predictions more, I guess, cut deeper and be more frequent. I guess when I look at this, is there any idea how, if we face a lack of information or if we can't have as much reliability or as much assurance in the information that we're getting, how does that impact our injury predictions and the methodology orders that they're based on? Does that question make sense?
100%. I mean, and to a large extent, it's TBD, right? I don't know that I can answer, but if you look at the way that methodology goes, it takes that baseline year, 2018, is that what it is, I think? 2018, and it compares that to what the current forecasted supply is. Where does that forecasted supply come from? It comes from SNOTEL surveys. It comes from USGS stream gauge monitoring. It comes from these sources that if we find ourselves in a scenario where you don't have the staff to maintain or to gather that information, then it really does raise questions about, okay, well then how are we going to be able to continue to do these things? How specifically, I don't know that I could say, but it definitely raises a red flag for me. And I guess I would say, we're seeing this is all part of an overarching effort to make our government more efficient and more effective. And I think I can say, generally speaking, for our folks, we align with that thinking, this idea of making sure we cut the waste and our government is doing what it should be doing, that we are mindful of the fact that these things take taxpayer dollars. And so very much mindful of that. And I think by and large, our members would agree with that notion and would be supportive of that kind of an effort. The questions, though, become what is kind of the fat versus what is critical activities? What do modern conditions bring us to a point, whether it be technologies or changing demands? Are there ways to build efficiencies there? I mean, at the end of the day, these types of growth, this type of change needs to be thoughtful and needs to be intentional, I would say. And that's really the message that we're sharing with our congressional offices is it's not that we're opposed to improving efficiencies and reducing the expense of government, but that such efforts need to be thoughtful, need to be intentional, need to be such that the backside is better than the front side, or at least what we have on the front side. And the things that really concern me about all of this are, one, are we going to have people there to do the jobs that need to be done? Two, the other reality, when you start talking about incentivizing early retirement and these kinds of things, you're going to start losing folks with that institutional knowledge, the background who have, and maybe they were planning on retiring in 5 years and had a plan to pass on that knowledge or whatever the case may be. You're talking leadership and institutional knowledge that you're going to learn, which is going to take time to build back up. And then, all of this stuff, permitting and things like that, are there going to be delays because now you have 3 people instead of 10 people were reviewing grant permits and applications and things like that. So I guess for us, really the key is a need to be thoughtful and intentional in these processes, but then also making sure that we have these critical activities covered.
So Paul, let's switch to something we do know now. There have been, so an agreement was reached on the ESPA water situation that we were all wrapped up in a lot last summer. And there have been several bills in the legislature this year around water. Can you talk about those, kind of where we're at now and how they'll affect our folks?
Yeah, so super. Today, as I mentioned earlier, today is an exciting day for exciting moment, I would say. I don't know about the day. It's a legislature. It could turn in a moment's notice, right? But we had several water bills this year, and right now we're tracking for 100% success on the bills that we supported being enacted into law, and the bills we opposed being dead. And so I guess I would touch on 3 bills that specifically we're going to see in terms of the ESPA and that kind of stuff, or really in terms of water management, are going to be, I think, fairly significant moving forward. The first, I'll just reiterate that funding, $30 million ongoing into the water board to address water supply and management and infrastructure challenges throughout the state of Idaho. Now, for year 1 under this bill, all of that money, $15 million each in districts 3 and district 4 of the water board for the specific purpose of promoting the success of the 2024 stipulated mitigation plan. So district 3 is around the Magic Valley area up to maybe American Falls, maybe not quite there, but about that far east. And then district 4 is the eastern part of the state, the upper part of the ESPA. And so 15 million in each district to help support the success of the 2024 stipulated mitigation plan. After that, money would be spread throughout the state. No more than 50% can be spent in any one district unless there's no other demand for it. That passed the House. It's got to go to the Senate. The House, I think, was going to be the heavier lift, frankly. The Senate previously had passed Senate Bill 1128, which was a similar bill calling for $30 million ongoing, and they passed that pretty handily. So I'm cautiously optimistic that this will get to the Senate and will pass through. But it passed through the House overwhelmingly, 56 to 13. And so that was great. So that's some money to get on the ground to help, move the ball, continue to move the ball forward in some of the challenges that we're facing. The other bill I would mention that comes directly from the water call challenges in the ESPA was Senate Bill 1161. And this one, one of the frustrations of the last go around of orders and things was that the department issued an amendment to its methodology. That methodology is the rules of the game, essentially. This is how we're going to conjunctively manage surface and groundwater in the Eastern Snake Plain. They amended the rules to the game on the same day that they issued orders implementing the rules of the game. And those amendments had some pretty significant impacts in the number of acres that were going to be curtailed. With similar injury determinations, the year before had a curtailment of about 150,000 acres. And this year under the new methodology, or that year under the new methodology, was closer to 700,000 acres. And so rules of the game were changed in April on the same day that an order applying the new rules went into effect. And that created a lot of frustration. And so Senate Bill 1061 basically says, Department of Water Resources, if you're going to change the rules to the game, you got to do so in a way that provides sufficient notice to the impacted water users. And in this case, it means you have to have an order no later than December 1 of the year before that order would go into effect. Otherwise, you'd have to wait till the following season. That has been signed into law, and so that Senate Bill 1061 has passed. The other bill that I would mention is a big priority of ours, and one that we as a water user community have been working on for over 3 years, and this involves the domestic use exemption in Idaho. 3 years ago, during the legislative session, I got a call in to visit with Senator Harris, who's from Southeast Idaho. And he says, Paul, I've got a problem. I got a constituent who has a problem. He has a spring in the foothills, feeds a ditch that wanders down to his field, and he waters with that water from the spring. But a new subdivision has gone in, 22 homes with 22 individual wells, and he's afraid that that's going to impact his spring flows. What can he do? And I had to tell Senator Harris there's not much, because under the current state of the law, that is perfectly legal, and you don't have to have a water right. There's no management, there's no oversight, there's nothing. You just put in those wells. Literally, while I was sitting in that meeting, and this isn't an exaggeration, literally while I was sitting in that meeting, I got an email from TJ Budge, who represents a number of the groundwater districts in eastern Idaho. And he said, Paul, we had a meeting today with the Idaho Groundwater Appropriators, or IGWA, and we think we need to do something with the domestic exemption. We've got all these wells going in, and we're spending all this money, and farms are being threatened to be shut down, and all this stuff is happening. And yet these wells continue to go in, completely unfettered. And so for 3 years, we talked. For 3 years, we engaged. For 3 years, we drafted and redrafted and edited and had phone calls and meetings. We engaged the Farm Bureau, cities, counties, agencies, home builders, realtors, well drillers, water users, and ultimately came up with what is Senate Bill 1083. And it did 4 things. Four concerns were identified, and this does 4 things. First, in regards to that fairness and the impacts on other uses, this would provide that in areas where the aquifer is struggling, so think a groundwater management area like the ESPA, think a critical groundwater area, think a moratorium area. In those areas, the domestic exemption would only apply to in-home use and livestock. Anything else requires a water right, just like every other water use in those areas. And so now on the ESPA, once this becomes a law on July 1, any subdivision that wants to go in and use domestic wells, they can have domestic wells for their in-home uses, but the irrigation, they'd have to figure out whether that be use the surface water, get a water right, whatever the case may be, they're now part of the game. Number 2, just in an effort to try and reduce some of the holes in the ground. Currently, if you want to use a domestic well, you have to have 1 well for every single home. In-home uses under 1083 could be combined into a single well. Now, this isn't going to apply to every subdivision or every situation, but there are situations where it'll apply, and you can combine and reduce some of the number of wells in the ground. Number 3, there was concern that the current enforcement mechanisms for the domestic exemption are just too cumbersome. And so the department isn't really able to do much in terms of making sure folks are complying with the domestic exemption. So we created a new provision that applies to domestic uses that's much more streamlined. There's engagement back and forth. There's ground truthing of impacts and use, and ultimately a fairer and more realistic process for enforcing the domestic exemption. And then finally, as we engaged our cities and counties, they expressed the need to have some clarity, additional clarity in the code as far as what their authorities were. And so we amended some of their provisions. At the end of the day, over the last 20 years, really the life of the Surface Water Coalition call, there have been 55,000 domestic wells put in Idaho. Each one authorizes up to a ½ acre of irrigation. That's almost 28,000 acres of irrigation that has gone in or been authorized in Idaho with no water rights, no management, no oversight, no nothing. And for the folks that I represent, it was time to do something a little bit different. And Senate Bill 1083 may not be exactly what water users would have drafted. I mean, I've got folks in our group that would like to get rid of the domestic exemption altogether, frankly, because at a time when we're struggling the way we are with water supplies, we should know entirely what's being done, what's being used. But this was a good compromise bill. And for an issue that is as politically wrought as domestic wells are, we were able to, because of this collaborative process, we were able to get it passed through overwhelmingly, 32-1 in the Senate and 63-2 in the House. And that has also been signed into law. There were a total of about 15 bills that we've supported. So you can go onto our webpage, iwua.org, under the advocacy tab, and you can see the other bills that we supported or engaged on this session. But those are probably the 3 that you'll see the most impact in the coming years.
Thank you, Paul. Great information. Just for a last comment here, any advice for farmers preparing for the growing season?
Pray. I mean, honestly, I can tell you that as I've reached out to our congressional offices, they want to know. They want to understand what the concerns are. They want to understand what the impacts are in terms of the thing that, you know, the staffing cuts and things we were talking earlier. Let them know. Reach out and let them know. The other thing I would say is don't get too caught up in the headline of the moment, because what we're seeing is on Tuesday the world is coming to an end, and on Wednesday something tweaks or changes, or we realize, well, maybe it's not totally at an end. Things are changing so fast and things are so unpredictable. Maybe if you took one thing from me today, it would be, whenever you hear something that freaks you out, breathe a little bit and let's see how it plays out. Because things, I mean, I can tell you, if we were talking in early February, this conversation would have been much different. There was really, tension level was up to 11 at that moment in time, and things have settled a little bit. I mean, it's still very uncertain, but yeah, just talk with your congressional offices and don't react too intensely to the news of the moment.
Absolutely. That's great advice, Paul. And along those lines, you mentioned kind of checking in with your colleagues, making sure they're in a good mental health state. And I would extend that, you know, also to all of our farmers out there. Reach out to your friends, your neighbors, you know, make sure you're all in a good mental health state going forward, and just doing those things that you need to get done, preparing for planting and growing and harvesting. So,
man, yep.
Yeah. Adam, did you have another question, Adam?
I did just have one other quick question, and that's, I wonder if there's any insight into whether it looks like we'll have an opportunity to recharge. I kind of get the impression that we felt for a while like there would definitely be flood releases, and that chance kind of seems to be going down as we get closer to the anticipated date of recharge. Do you have any insight on that?
You know, no, I apologize, because I was in the same boat. You know, we're still tracking pretty well. I just pulled up the SNOTEL. I mean, I know that not the Upper Snake, but Owyhee. I had a meeting yesterday, and our manager down in the Owyhee had to miss it because they were turning water on yesterday, which is unheard of in the Owyhee. Unheard of. And even up there in the Snake, you know, some of those basins are still tracking, but I honestly, I have not heard any updates in the last, I'd say week and a half. So I don't know what the prospect for recharge will be, or additional recharge will be.
All right. Just making sure I don't see any other hands up. Paul Arrington. Oh, hang on one second. We got a comment. Corey Kress, I have no dog in this fight. Luckily for a change, it's good to be a dryland guy. I do follow snorkel quite religiously as snowmobiles. I know where a lot of sites are.
I think that's SNOTEL. Yeah.
SNOTEL, yep. I've never felt the snowpack numbers were so far off as they were this year. Maybe it's because mid-elevation pack was non-existent and most of them are up high, but I thought they were wrong.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that yet, so that's interesting. I'll see what if I can find anything out about that. Interesting.
Yeah. Thanks for that comment, Corey. Paul, we appreciate you today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for the invite. I appreciate it.
Yes, and for those of you online, thank you so much for tuning in and joining the conversation today. Just as a reminder, we will have this up on our website as well as our social media and YouTube and podcast platforms. And just a plug for our next From the Field, we are planning that for April 10th to talk with Pete Laudeman from US Wheat Associates. We'll chat about the current status of food aid. So look for more information coming out about that. Again, thank you all for joining today, and we will see you next time on From the Field.